Welcome everyone that's joined us so far. We're going to start off with by introducing ourselves. I am Nathan Ross Adams, and I am an attorney with Michalsons. I'll be hosting the webinar today. Just a bit about myself. I am really passionate about emerging technologies and how data protection laws as well as information security impacts them. And I also love contracts. From a personal side, I'm not only a lawyer, I also enjoy long walks on the beach and large margaritas. But on a serious note, I love music. And joining us today are our wonderful panel of attorneys. So I'm going to start off by introducing our managing attorney, John Giles. John, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yes, thanks, Nathan. It's great to be on this webinar. I really like practicing law differently. I think the law should be accessible, empowering, and helpful. And really, I've worked in various different ways to make that a reality. One of the ways is through Michalsons, and it's been about a 15-year journey, and has been a really rewarding and exciting thing to have done. But it's great to be here, and thanks very much for having me.
Perfect. Thanks, John. Next, we have another one of our attorneys, Zwakele Mbandra. Would you like to introduce yourself to our attendees?
Thank you, Nathan. Hi, everyone. My name is Zwakele. I am one of the attorneys here at Michalsons. I'm a professional millennial, which means that most of my time you'll find me on a device of some kind, and also that reminds me I need to update something. I love long walks on the beach like Nathan, but instead of margarita, give me a glass of bubbles and I'll love you forever. I'm really excited about today. I'm excited about being legal design, excited about talking about how we practice law differently, and I think especially because for my background when I was younger and also ad hoc of being a tutor, I love it when people understand what's going on. And I'm excited about the parts of this talk that we're going to have today around how do people really understand what's going on with law. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Zwakele. Next, we have another one of our attorneys, Jared Stradum, and he'll be our question master and try not to torture us with too many questions from the audience today. Jared, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Nathan. Much like you, I'm passionate about emerging technologies. So I spend quite a lot of my time just trying to keep on the pulse in terms of the legal ramifications of all new technologies that are emerging. And then on that same note, I really enjoy approaching law differently. I think we are in quite an interesting transition where we're looking at implementing new ways of making it accessible and digestible for the general consumer. And I think that's a very powerful thing to do in the legal industry. So I'm super excited about this presentation. And at about 5 p.m., I'll probably be teeing off on the golf course. So it's an exciting day ahead.
Okay, perfect, Jared. I hope you have a ball when you go on the golf course. Next and last but not least, we have our amazing legal designer, Urania. Urania, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Urania. I'm part of the Michalsons marketing and strategy team and have sort of pivoted into legal design. I actually specialize in a lot of e-learning things. And I'm just so delighted to be working on legal design for Michalsons. It's very refreshing and exciting. If I were to tell you what I enjoy in my spare time, I am a lover of all things design. So that's clothes and furniture, and I love attending design events and things like that. And I love a good book. Although I won't say no to a cocktail with Nathan and Zwakele.
Perfect. Thanks, Urania. I think you forgot to mention your superpower of freezing time as well, because somehow you managed to be in the future and frozen at, I think it's 25 to 3 in the afternoon. But just to, well, we've introduced ourselves now, and now it's time for you as the attendees to introduce yourselves to us. So I'm going to be sharing a quick poll to gauge the audience that's attending today. So let me know if you can see that on your screen. Should be coming up shortly. Okay, perfect. And as you'll notice, while you're completing the poll, we each have different backgrounds and they should be reflecting our personality. As you can see, John tends to be very serious. Zwakele and I are, well, Zwakele is a bit fun. Urania is so super focused on design. Jared is blurring out the reality so that we can focus all on him. And I'm spending some time in some villa somewhere. So yeah.
Wait until John tells you about the surfing, and then you'll know that he's the funnest of all of us.
Yeah, I did forget to mention that I do love surfing, hiking, and wine.
All at once, John. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to stop and share the results of the poll. Yeah, so basically it's mainly in-house legal, then we have some compliance professionals, then other, please let us know in the comments. We're always interested to know about different attendees. And then we have some privacy and design professionals in here as well. Good to see you. What I'm going to do next is share my screen with you. So let's do this. You should be able to see it now. Okay, perfect. So our webinar today is about legal design, and we've introduced ourselves and we know a bit more about you. But I thought I'd show you the journey that we're going to be taking you on. We're going to first start with why. So why legal design, why we have actually, why we've adopted this approach to services, what legal design is, how it works, and then the next steps you can take. We thought that we'd keep this as simple as possible because there's so much noise out there in our day-to-day lives in what we practice. And so we wanted to keep the message clean and simple for you. So I'm going to be starting with a question of why. And the why is pretty simple. At Michalsons, we are passionate about delivering the law differently. And where this actually comes from is we have a particular value set and we have certain types of people. You'll notice that everyone on this webinar has pushed boundaries in some sort of way where they've moved out of the traditional pathway of what lawyers should be, of what technologists should be, of what designers should be like. So this legal design specifically resonates with who we are as people, who we are as a firm, and the values that we share. So it's consistent with all of those points. And so I thought I'd just actually segue off to John and just talk briefly with John about how he came to practicing the law differently and why it's so important.
Yes, thanks. And I think when I was at university and when I started practicing law in law firms, I really realized that what the position had been with law for possibly centuries is that it was very, very dense, very difficult to access. It often was written in crazy language that only a select few people understood. It was often in books locked away in a library. And it just wasn't accessible to people. And for me, that was just crazy because it means that people can't use it and the law can't achieve the objectives that it seeks to achieve. So, I mean, a few examples. What's the point of a 300-page contract written in dense legalese that's meant to be regulating a relationship about implementing a new IT system? It gets stuck in a drawer, nobody ever looks at it, and it has no chance of achieving the objective of trying to facilitate a good relationship and help the parties avoid disputes. it just doesn't make sense. What's the point in a constitution or a Bill of Rights if people can't read it? They don't know what it means. They can't follow it. It's just crazy. I mean, an example of that is I've been lucky enough to see 2 of the 5 original Magna Cartas. And in both instances, I had to go to a museum or a library, stand in a queue for hours, and then eventually get to see it. And you couldn't really read it anyway. But that's an example of documents that just people couldn't see. So I think, and the tragedy is that situation even 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and even to today, to an extent, still exists. And partly lawyers are to blame, because what lawyers then did is they spent a lot of time studying so that they would be able to understand the law, and they became the gatekeepers. And lawyers would then say, well, you have to come through me to understand the law. And unfortunately, I charge a fortune. It's a great business model, isn't it? And it's just, it's not acceptable. And so really for 20 years or so, I've really wanted to change that situation and make the law accessible, empowering, and helpful. And there are different ways of doing that. So I fell in love with plain legal language, and language is a key element of making something accessible. And it's become more commonplace now, but 15 years ago, plain legal language was hard, because lawyers who wrote in legalese fought back. They didn't want people to be able to understand it. They wanted to be in power and be the gatekeeper. So that was a component of it. And then also what I then started realizing is that it's not just the language, it's also the typography. It's what it looks like. What does a document look like? How much white space is there? And then moving further into, well, how do you actually get an audience? Because that's what it's all about. The reader needs to be able to understand the document. Bill of Rights, for example, or a great example is the Parliament creates 30 new crimes for cybercrime, as an example. How are people meant to comply with the law if they don't know what they are, and they can't access it, they can't read it, they can't understand it? So it really is so important to use legal design to ensure that the intended audience can actually read and understand what the law is. Yeah, back to you, Nathan.
Perfect. Thanks very much, John. Next, I have a question directed at Urania, and this is basically about her experience of working with attorneys, how complex they can be, and how challenging it is to actually move from a place of the law is at the center to humans and everyday people are actually at the center. Oh, Urania, you're on mute. Our famous saying for the past few years.
Actually have hoodies that say you're on mute on the back. I think that it sort of helps that I'm married to a lawyer. So, you know, I have to listen to the jargon every day. But one of the little hills that I've had to overcome is that you guys tend to think that everything is so much more complex than it is. And it might be because you have this vast knowledge, and I, as the man on the street, just need to know this little bit, because that's all that really applies to me. And maybe that's all that really applies to your workers, or, you know, just the person reading one simple contract. So I've sort of come to realize that there is going to be that discussion of, but oh, there's all of this stuff that we need to consider. And I often have to go, just take a second and let's focus. What is it that we want to say? What is the log line? What is the tagline that we want to come up with? What are we achieving here? And what was your question, Nathan Ross?
Yeah, well, it was just about your experience. Have you often encountered legal documents that are simple and easy to understand, or just give you exactly what you need?
Not at all. And I think that is, I think that demystifying the law is a huge privilege. And I think that it's really such an exciting place to be in, because I don't look at legal documents and go, oh, I understand this. It's just a wall of words to me. And I'm sure that it's a wall of words to most people that read them. It's something that you don't look forward to doing. And you're kind of a little bit scared of signing the dotted line if you're not an attorney yourself. So this sort of extracting of information, simplifying, is such a lovely thing. And I've learned that the law doesn't have to be scary and overwhelming. And I'm hoping that through our work in legal design that other people will feel the same way.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Urania. And you raised some excellent points. I think one of the important things that has stood out for me is the fact that as lawyers, we're trained to think from our own perspective, but from everyone else's perspective. So we need to think from IT's perspective. We need to think from compliance. We need to think from a privacy perspective if we're dealing with a privacy document. But often a person in an organization, whether it's an information officer or the MD or the head of IT, just needs to know a bit out of that document that we're reviewing. And that moves me to next to Zwakele. Zwakele has extensive commercial experience, and he's often engaged with people across the spectrum within an organization. And so Zwakele, could you perhaps give an indication of how that experience has been as it relates to legal design?
I think sometimes, and I started my career off in the commercial space before I came into law. And before I came into law and I was in law school, you know, lawyers and in law school particularly, you tend to think that the world revolves around you. I think there's all of this information that you're getting. You're learning cool things about the Constitution. You're learning this and you're learning that. And also just like, I think I hate suits for making it seem, I hate suits for making it seem as though like, you know, being a lawyer is about these very complicated things that you say and screaming objection here and there. I went into the corporate space and realized that people just want to know what to do and what not to do. And the job of someone with information, and that is across departments, whether it's IT or it's the lawyers in the business or it's the finance guys in the business. The job of people with a large body of knowledge within an organization is to help people make decisions. And the people who need to make decisions don't need to know everything that you know. They just need to know what affects them. And so I think that's you know, speaks to Urania's point around, you know, as lawyers sometimes want to make things complicated. And, you know, I think about my jurisprudence classes in law school and the idea of the social contract. And when you distill it all the way down there, really, are we able to take the law and help people help people achieve whatever outcomes they need to be achieving? I think that's the big thing that gets lost in the jargon, that gets lost in the deadlines and the KPIs, is that are we, and communication is a big thing, and Urania will speak to that. And John will also speak to that. I think you'll come to find out about the infamous diagrams that I love so much. And it's about communicating in an effective way so that people who need to do something are able to do whatever they need to do. And we are just at the forefront of the law. And so how do we then take the law and communicate the law to the people who need to implement it in a way that empowers them, in a way that allows them to make the decisions that they need to be making? And that's really, for me, the crux of it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Zwakele. So this brings us to our next section, which is what is legal design. And before I actually start there, I would just like to remind you that you can pose any questions that you have in the question and answer section, which is at the bottom right-hand corner, and you should see a Q&A box over there, or an icon at least. For everyone in the audience, you can actually upvote those questions as well. So we'll get the most important questions and then we'll deal with them as we go along. Let me just move, let me zoom back a bit on my screen. So before we go, well, we're going to the next slide that we're going to be dealing with is what is legal design. But before we actually go into the detail, I want to just ask you about your legal design knowledge. So I'm going to be sharing a poll with you, a new poll, and let us know how much you know about legal design. Perfect. We could be preaching to the converted. You could be hearing something completely new today. But what I think why this is important is we want to know how we can tailor the rest of this presentation to you so that we give you the most value at the end of the day. So the answers are streaming in quite beautifully. It actually always excites me to see how quickly we can get responses. I think pre-COVID, we wouldn't have been in the situation. We'd have many people in a room putting up their hands and voting in a sort of haphazard fashion. But I'm going to end the poll there and share the results. So it seems like most people know a bit or nothing about legal design. There are some that know a fair amount, and there is one person on this call who knows everything. That person who knows everything, please pop us a message anytime, and we will be welcome to answer. We're welcome to answer any of your questions, and you're welcome to engage us for our services since you're this expert on legal design. But yeah, let me stop sharing my screen. So we will be starting with the first point, and what is legal design? And at the end of the day, it's about human beings. It's about you and me. Hopefully there aren't any bots on this call, but at the end of the day, it's about bringing the law to us. And even as lawyers, I know Urania mentioned that lawyers are complex, but we get decision fatigue, we get tired, and often when we have to answer to those higher up or our clients, they ask simple and direct questions. So for example, they would ask us, what are the payment terms in my agreement? Is there, when does my liability get activated? What laws do I need to comply with this agreement? And in that case, what the usual step is to actually check the agreement, open it up, find the section that is relevant to that, and then describe it at length in detail, notate it, send an email explaining what it is, and then giving the answer to the person. So it's that entire process. But what if we actually reduced it to contracts where it simply said, this is the timeline, this is what needs to be done. And we'll show you a few examples as we go along, but that's the main point of bringing legal design to humans. The next is about legal comms, and I'm going to hand over to Zwakeli to speak about that briefly.
So thank you, Nathan. And I like the, how you introduced the conversation, because I think one of my favorite things about legal design is the fact that it's actually not actually about the law, it's about communicating. And so that's such a, a mind-boggling thing for lawyers to get. That a lot of your job is about communicating, making sure that people need to know the things that they need to know. And I want to start off with with this thing that we say at Michalsons, that the law doesn't have to be complicated for you to get the most protection out of it. So just because something is written simply doesn't mean that you lose the protection of the law. And I think that's an important thing to get. I think, as John will speak about it later on, I think one of my favorite things about working with John was, getting into the actual crux of the things that we were doing. And so like when you look at laws, for example, and you think about POPI, There's so many things in Poppy. You think about the cybersecurities, the Cyber Crimes Act. There's so many things there. I think, John, there's about 54 crimes there. And do the people who need to know what those crimes are know what that is? When you think about there's policies that within your organization you want to communicate to the rest of the business. Are people able to understand what those policies are? There are regulations that might have impact on you. Do people know what those things are? So as lawyers, you'd find that we know what these things are. We know what the laws are. We know what contracts say. The fine print, the very complicated indemnity clauses, the very complicated warranties, the unnecessary agreement, the necessary language in it. John's spoken about plain language. There's those things that we are so used to doing because we've been dealing with these core parts of the law, and we sometimes miss that just because we understand it, other people might not, or people who aren't trained in the law might not understand those things. So how do you communicate the law effectively? Poppy came into play. How do you communicate that to people on the ground who are dealing with the obligations that it might impose? Contracts are coming into play. There's DPAs and figuring those things out. How do people who aren't lawyers understand what they need to be looking out for in these contracts? Is that being communicated clearly at the stage where we are putting together a contract, or is there further conversations that need to go into explaining an agreement? It's not, I always find that you've lost as a lawyer if you have to explain the agreement that you've drafted. It's a good, I think it's the thing how I know I'm doing well as a lawyer if the documents that I'm producing are self-explanatory. And that's a thing that gets lost a lot for legal professionals. There's case law as well. We've tried a lot at Michalsons and through our data protection program and our various efforts within the firm in figuring out ways of making sure that the information that comes from case law is distilled to the right people. I know we have Giles files as well within that respect. And so just generally the conversation that, or the point that I want to drive home here is that you know a lot. That's not what we're challenging you here on. You know a lot. The magic is, are you able to communicate what you know to the people who need to know what you know so that they can make decisions? And I think that is the theme that you'll hear on and on as we discuss how, as we discuss what, is how do you communicate the things that you know to the people who need to know them?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Zwakele. You made some excellent points. And so just to tie that, legal design is about human beings, and it's about communicating legal documents to human beings. And that may seem to exclude lawyers as being human beings, but we are human beings. We know a lot of lawyers who are human beings. But the point is that there is this legacy of the legal system which is exclusionary, and we all know this, even if we don't care to admit it. And what legal design is actually trying to do is to create clear communication, to create accessibility. And this moves us actually to our next point, which John will speak to briefly, and that's about clear communication.
Yeah, I think, clear communication has many different components to it, but as we've been saying, that's the essence of what we're trying to achieve. And I think to pick up on some of the things what Kelly was talking about, and if we go to a case and a judgment as a good example, I often find that that judges write very lengthy judgments that are very hard to understand. And we often try to simulate the situation where a client is sitting across the table from you and they've got a problem, and you say to them, oh, there's a recent judgment that can help you with this problem that you have. And they say, really, tell me about it. And then you've got 2 minutes to explain it in plain, simple language, and also show what it means for them. So the other question we often ask is, well, so what? Now you talk about something and it's like, well, so what? What does it mean? What does it matter to somebody? What outcome does that achieve? And I think those are good techniques to really apply to lots of different things. So for example, with a contract, I recently looked at a shareholders agreement, and the client said to me they really want it on one page. They're not interested in a 6-page shareholders agreement, which I thought was in beautiful plain language. The client said, no, I want 1 page. And I literally had to go and think, okay, what if I was just talking to the shareholders, what would be the 5 things I would say to them, and put that in a document? And I think the result was a beautiful result, and I'm very pleased the client really pushed me. But it then gets down to, and really anyone can pick up that 1 page, read it, and it explains the relationship between shareholders. So it speaks for itself, and really it's about involving and using different techniques to achieve it, I think, is an important thing. So it's not just language, it's also design, and design is often overlooked. The focus is on language and not on the design. Back to you, Nathan.
Perfect. Thanks so much, John. And ultimately, it comes down to your last point about what does my client need at the end of the day. We understand what the law, how we need to protect our clients through the law, but often that doesn't translate into the ultimate commercial needs of our clients. The next slide that I'll be moving to deals with design, and I'll be handing over to Urania to speak a bit more to that. So Urania, for this section, it will be looking at how important design is to provide visual cues to an audience so that they can understand and digest information better.
Well, if we think about the society that we live in, it takes about, we have somebody's attention for about 2 to 5 seconds before we lose it, right? And I know that we don't think about things like this when we talk contracts and sort of legal documents, but at the end of the day, that's the attention span that we have. But if you were to walk past a sign, for example, in the park, or on the road while you're driving, these symbols just automatically speak to you. Another thing that we don't consider often is that we were taught to think, to communicate through language, but we also communicate through visuals. There's that whole idea of a picture speaks 1,000 words. It's quite cheesy, but it is true, right? If you were to look at this general warning that we're looking at, you know that dogs are allowed on the beach, no horses, no alcohol. You look at it and you automatically know. And so legal design is really just about bringing those elements together and making the law easier to understand in a faster way. And we don't often talk about retention when it comes to adults, but at the end of the day, if you're going to follow a law, that information needs to be retained. And so if it's communicated in a way that's interesting and easy to understand, for example, through an analogy or through a simple symbol like this, we will have more people retaining information, more people in companies going, hey, I shouldn't leave out this document for everyone to see because of POPIA or the GDPR or whatever it is. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Urania. And it actually relates to John's point earlier on about the Cybercrimes Act that was recently enacted in South Africa and commenced. What if the version that actually got disseminated or given to the public actually consisted of a diagram like this with 30 crimes that you aren't allowed to do? If that were possible, why shouldn't it be the standard? Because and for lawyers that may seem terrible because then you removing them from the equation, but as a lawyer, your work becomes more focused, and it will be focused on actually implementing cybercrimes within organizations in a way that matters, instead of dealing with fluff that's around there. And legal design is challenging in a way that it requires us to have honest conversations with ourselves as practicing professionals with what we're doing. Are we actually offering value-added services to our clients, or are we wasting their time? And that actually brings me to our next point, which is about accessibility. And accessibility to me is very important. I mean, I shared a post a while ago or I think a few weeks ago on LinkedIn about why legal design is important to me. And legal design is important to me is because I had learning difficulties when I was at high school in comprehending large volumes of text. And the way that I overcome that, or the way that I could overcome that, was through understanding that my learning style was visual. And some learners have visual style learning, others have auditory learning where they need to hear the message. And so if there are these different learning styles and accessibility needs to be approached in different ways, what's to say that the law can't be done in that way? And I'm actually going to hand over to Zwakele to speak a bit more about this, but and he actually did something excellent recently, was where we had a post of content on our website, and we thought that, well, maybe all the people can't digest the message by actually reading it. Maybe we could have an auditory example where he would dictate what the article said, and would record his voice and put it over there. And we had excellent feedback. So Zwakele, I'd like to hand over to you just to speak about accessibility and how important it is.
Thank you, Nathan. I think accessibility, when I think about accessibility, one of the first words that come to mind is inclusion. I think where we've been speaking a lot about having, and I saw Reika's comment as well around, having the end user in mind. And when you have the end user in mind, you then start going down a road of really trying to discover who this end user is. And within accessibility, there's so many things that we can discuss, and maybe I'll start with the article the post that we wrote, and then we decided to put a little voiceover on it, because what accessibility meant in that respect is that there was some information that we had about NDAs, and an opinion that we some thoughts we had about NDAs, and we thought a lot of people deal with NDAs out there, so we want to offer information out there for people who are trying to figure out one thing or another about NDAs, and within our respect, who are speaking about a specific software. And then as we're thinking about that, we thought there are going to be people who are going to be reading this, but there are going to be people who don't have time to read this. And we know that within a digital the digital world that we find ourselves in, the idea of podcasts and music and watching things is there's been a lot of success within those areas. So how do we take those successes and put them into and bring them into the world of NDAs? And what that looked like for us was just someone can read out this article. Someone can read out this article. We can put the recording on the website. We can put the recording over our post. And then someone can be busy with something while they're doing this. This helps people who, for example, don't have time to read, but want to know about NDAs. But also it makes the information a bit more accessible, because now you're catching a larger audience. There are people who maybe might have struggled reading. You get to capture that audience as well. So it's bringing it back to Urania's point around. You want to have the human in mind within legal design. And I think when I think about it, particularly as a lawyer, and I think about my work, There's work that when I do work with companies, for example, there's work around legal design of distilling laws and policy. So distilling information within ourselves, within an organization. And then there's work that is done in clearly communicating information to the outside world, so outside of ourselves. And you have to have openness in both respects. You have to have the principle of openness within both respects. Within an internal sense, you might find that, within that context, a lot of times you'll find that there's not a lot of heavy legal consequences. There's maybe a main document that you're distilling. So I'm speaking about policies in this respect and procedures, and trying to get those to be communicated in a way that your staff complement understands it. And clarifying processes for people to know if something happens that touch bases with the law. For example, there's data subject access requests. How does an ordinary person working within the organization who has a touch point with access requests know what to do within those circumstances? So there's that aspect of it, and making sure that that information is accessible to people who need it, visually, auditory, and understanding what information that they need to understand. And from an external point of view, which is what John was speaking about with the shareholders agreement, it's these things that have a lot of legal consequence. So you think of a shareholders agreement, there's a lot of weight behind that. But again, to the point, explaining something simply doesn't mean you lose the protection of the law. It's about doing the hard thing, which is going into, and John was walking you through the process of legal design. It's about going through the task at hand, which was a shareholders agreement, understanding what is the crux of it, what is the most important thing here, and what is the most important thing I need to communicate with whoever's dealing with this document, and charting your way from there. So the conversation around openness is a conversation around doing the hard thing, which is taking a step back and understanding and putting the end user in mind.
Okay, thank you so much, Zwakele. And next we'll be moving to some practical examples. But before I do that, I would actually just like to draw everything together and say that we're not ignorant. We understand that plain language and legal design are techniques to communicate the law. So they are means to achieve legal communications, but they are not the end. We are not aiming to. Plain language isn't the end that we're moving towards a legal design. For example, in a contract, we can't avoid using the word warranty because it has specific legal meaning. And so we won't exclude that if we were using it in a legal design or plain language context. So we are sensitive to those considerations. Because you do get designers who over-design. That is a thing where people over-design and then lose the meaning. And because we a team that consists of both lawyers, designers, and clients, getting feedback from the clients, we have the whole picture. But now it's time for some practical examples, which I'm sure you've been waiting for. Let me just actually minimize my screen a bit so you can see this clearly. But basically, this is the POPI Act. All of you should know about the POPI Act right now. If you don't, please sign up to our newsletter so you can find out a bit more. But what we've done is, say a client comes to you and asks, what is the POPI Act? What's the key points that the POPI Act's trying to make? What we've actually done is we've taken on that instruction and we've created a legal design version of it. Actually, the person that designed this is in the room with us, ladies and gentlemen. It's Urania. And Urania, would you just mind taking us briefly through how you actually distilled an entire piece of legislation into this beautiful guide?
Okay, so I obviously can't take all of the credit. It's as you previously said, I'm not working by myself. I'm working with attorneys and clients. In this case, what happened was an associate said to me, let's do this. I had a quick look at the actual act, And what I could do is extract the information myself, but why would I do that if I can have a meaningful conversation? So we had a few meaningful conversations, as well as I was also given some support documents because information had been extracted before. And then what I did was we had conversations around things like who's the target audience, what is the final result supposed to be, and I extracted the information to make sense to me, and I think that that's a little bit of a superpower in that I'm not a lawyer. I don't know what these things are, and if it makes sense to me, it should make sense to you. I presented that to the people that I was working with on the team, and then they added a couple of bits and pieces here. And like you said, Nathan Ross, you can't simplify the language to the point that it loses its meaning, it loses its legal meaning. And so there were conversations around things like that, and what needs to stay and what needs to go. And we came up with this.
Thanks, Urania. And John, I see you have your hand raised. You're on mute.
Urania is very good at asking, but what's the essence of that? What specifically is the law trying to say? So what's the important component of it? And by asking those very clever questions, it forces somebody to come up with the nub of something. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, John. Another example of legal design in action is a DPA. So DPA is a data processing agreement, and it's how a responsible party, so the person who decides why and how to process personal information, but mostly the why, delegates a certain responsibility to someone called an operator, and they usually do the processing on behalf of the responsible party. And what POPIA requires is actually an agreement between the responsible party and the operator. And this is called a data processing agreement because it's about processing data. And we wanted it to be simple, but also attractive to the reader. And so we reduced it to a pretty little document, which still conveyed the meaning. So that was another example. The next example we've showed you already, which is in public spaces, but it is very important about having simple signs that the general public can understand. And then the last one is a privacy policy. And this is work in progress that we're currently doing for an internal client. And yeah, so this is an example of, instead of having a Word document privacy policy that's on your website, why not have an interactive guide like this, where you can actually click on different types of information or icons, and it actually opens up and describes exactly what the person needs to know. So it becomes an interactive experience. It's less focused on the law and more focused on the end user. And yeah, so these are some beautiful practical examples of what legal design is about. John, would you like to add something?
Yes, just to connect to what Zakele said as well about using different channels of communication to get the message across. And traditional privacy policies was just a wall of text. And there's a big trend towards it now becoming a combination of icons, pictures, videos, sound bites, and that's the future. It's using every different technique of communication to get a message across to an audience.
Perfect. Thanks, John. And so we've explained what legal design is, and we hope you have a better understanding of that. But we'd like to gauge your feedback on what you think about what we've said, whether you think legal design is something legitimate or not, or whether you think it's complete and utter nonsense. So I'm going to be sharing a poll with you. Let me just think. What do you think so far? Just answer it as you go along. But just to keep you in the loop about what's going on. Legal design isn't something new. It definitely isn't something new. It is something that people, designers and lawyers have been doing over time. I mean, John's been doing it for nearly 20 years, where he's needed to explain complex concepts using diagrams. We know that because we, as working at the firm, the go-to saying, and Swakele can attest to this, is, where is the diagram? That is John's key question. Some of us have PTSD as a result of that, but we're recovering, we're safe now. But yeah, it's really important. So I'm going to end that poll and share it with you. Fortunately, nobody thinks it's utter arse gravy, which we're very happy with, but we're glad you enjoy it. Some of you are not sure about how you feel, and that's okay. This is a safe space for everyone. And others of you are indifferent. So these are usually the practical people that are indifferent, that want to use it if it works. And so next, and we'll spend a little bit of time on this, and this is just how legal design happens. And essentially what it does is, so just to give you a bit of academic thinking, there is a concept called design thinking, which is out there. It has transformed multiple industries. Yeah, it has transformed multiple industries by giving people better ways to think about how they solve problems. And when it comes to law, some person thought that, well, this would be great to solve legal problems. And then another person took it even a step further. How can we communicate the law better using legal design thinking? And so the process is to take a problem, and I'll use a practical example that we experienced recently. A client approached us saying that our people don't know when to report data breaches. So data breach is when data would be breached for some other reason. Under POPI, it's called security compromises. So going through this process, we would empathize, ideate, prototype, test, and then iterate. Empathize, meaning we would engage with the client, try to understand what exactly the problem is. Then we would ideate, which is generate multiple ideas to approach the problem. We'd create a prototype version for them, an example, like the privacy policy we had showed you. And then we'd gather audience feedback to improve the solution. So this is an important one, and it's actually my favorite one. So if you were the client that wanted to know how the employees could report data breaches better, we wouldn't only speak to the client directly, we would actually get hands-on feedback from the employees who would be reporting these breaches. We'd let them ask hundreds of questions. We'd get them to actually communicate with us what they're struggling to grasp, and then we would incorporate that feedback, iterate it, and then come up with a final solution. That's basically the legal design process. I'm not sure, does anyone on the panel want to add anything about the process? Okay, nope, good. And before we actually go to our ending, Jared, you've been very quiet. Do you have any questions for us?
Yeah, so there is one question. I was busy typing out an answer, but maybe we can address it live. It's just essentially, do we have any tips on how to actually approach the issue of writing a legal jargon and how to ingrain that new process of converting it into plain language? Is there a defined thought process, or do we have tips that we can share?
I'd like to start that conversation, and maybe if John could pick up on it because he's had the most experience. But it's about change management. That's what it's about. There's a big part of doing plain language work, of legal design work, of doing advanced legal work is learning about change management, how to integrate new systems into existing and legacy processes in a way that incentivizes the people at the end user to actually change. And John, would you like to add more bit about that?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question and something that I'm very passionate about. And I've just quickly brought up a presentation which I thought I'd show you quickly. So I'll share my screen, and this is another presentation actually that we do called Embracing Plain Legal Language. And I actually, Nathan and I have plans to present this at some of the law schools in South Africa during the year. And really, it's about exactly the question you're asking: how do you become a better writer? So there are many ways. The first is to get bitten. Refer to books. There are lots of fantastic books. Someone mentioned Brian Garner's books, but there's a recent book that's been published by Clarity Editorial, which is very good. And then using style guides, using writing assistants. A few people have mentioned Grammarly as an example, would be to use that. And then really seek to understand your content. There are things like these 10 commandments for writing, and be brave, be prepared to really try and reinvent something. And then there are various techniques there, and we obviously don't have time to go into more detail now, but essentially I think what my recommendation would be is once the bug's bitten, you're going to need to practice. Nobody's a fantastic writer. You have to get the right books, refer to them, and just practice. And when I discovered plain language in about 2005, I spent days rewriting contracts and writing them again, and writing opinions, writing it again. And it really is a case of putting in the effort.
Perfect. Thanks so much, John. I see that there's one more question in the chat from Rika about how long does the process usually take, and how do the designers accept iterations? Too often legal is expected to submit the copy and then not further editing. I see the legal design process is quite fluid until released and then changed again after release depending on feedback. So Rika, I'll jump into that, and then I'll get some feedback from the rest of the panel as well. But a big part of legal design that we haven't mentioned is effective project management. It cannot be done without having an effective project manager on the team and agreeing on the deadlines and steps in the process ahead. So for example, if it's a privacy policy, the people that need to be engaged on the team, so the lawyers and the designers, they need to be engaged until the last point in that process, so until the final version is actually given to the clients. If they are not, then you have the risk of losing meaning along the way. And again, when it comes to the legal design process that I had shown earlier on, designers, you have to strike a balance. So on the left-hand side, you'll have the law, and on the right, you'll have design. They need to meet each other halfway. If they don't, on the one hand, you'll have over-design, or on the other hand, you'll have legalese. You'll be back to the same position. So that's important. That's how it answered. Urania, I don't know if you could just speak to the process about how you've actually actively involved the attorneys throughout the process to you producing a final document like that POPIA plain language guide.
So I think one of the really key points is having that conversation in the beginning, and then having me go away and come back with a rough sketch, because that's where a lot of the work needs to happen. That rough sketch can be moved and changed, and discussion can happen quite a lot at that point. And then I will move it on to sort of digital iteration. And let's say that we'll call that version 1 of our document. In version 1, we should actually be fairly set in where we are. Sure, we'll change a couple of things here and there. We'll separate visuals. It will be more about visuals than about large pieces of content. Maybe a few words will be changed. But if we're overhauling things at that stage, we are not on the same page, and we need to go back, and we need to redraft, and we need to have that conversation. In terms of timelines, as Nathan Ross said, it's about project management and teamwork. But I would say for the things that you've seen that we've shown you, it takes a week, and it's also about how effective the documents I'm given are. So, for example, this week I was given a really great little one-pager from one of the associates, and she said, "This is what I want," and I can run with that. If it's something as complex as an entire contract or an entire law that I have to wade through myself, that would obviously take much longer. I hope that answers your question.
Perfect. John?
Yeah, how do you check that your communication is accurate and working and clear? You go and check with the audience that they understood what you're trying to communicate. And that's why the process is fluid, because once you've got that feedback, you might need to tweak your communication to make sure that the audience gets it. And so there is definitely some iteration that always happens.
Perfect. Thanks, John. We are actually a bit over time. So the last thing that I'd like to share is just a bit of some key insights. Can you see my screen? Perfect. So the main points that I'd like to drive home is that legal design is about many things, but it is ultimately a tool that empowers you to change the world. We believe in that. We believe it's changed the world for many of our clients. And the question is not whether you should be doing legal design, it's why you haven't started already. I mean, I think it's important not only for us, but for you to be the pioneers in your organization, the innovators, and add value through this in a way that your competitors aren't doing. I know that may seem as a sort of competitive approach to it, but privacy has become a competitive edge. We've seen that with Apple happening recently. Them taking a stand towards privacy has driven more clients towards them. The same with certain internet browsers. So to end, I just say, please contact us if you think this presentation has been important to you. We offer multiple legal design services. We'll be sending a follow-up mail to you to let you know a bit more about the services we offer, as well as sending you a copy of the presentation. Otherwise, I'd just like to say thank you very much to the panel. You will get a copy of the recording of this session, but thank you, John. Thank you, Zwakele. Thank you, Urania and Jared. Do you have any final words?
Yeah, thank you, Nathan Ross. It's thank you for having us, and I think you put together a fantastic presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nathan. Really enjoyed this.
It was good fun.
Thanks very much.
We should do it sometime again soon. But thank you very much to our audience as well, and we'll be in touch with you.